Welcome to a very special webinar today on understanding the cognitive changes associated with Parkinson's. We are honored to be joined by a dementia expert named Adria Thompson. Adria Thompson is a licensed speech language pathologist, a TEDx speaker, and a faculty member in the Communication Disorders program at Eastern Kentucky University. With over a decade of experience in dementia care, her passion for her work is grounded in both clinical and a personal connection, as her grandmother lives with dementia. Excuse me. Adria is the founder of Be Light Care Consulting, where she creates short form, evidence based video content for over 480,000 professional and personal caregivers on social media. Adria's content breaks down complex dementia care concepts into practical, real world strategies. Very delighted to welcome Adria, and please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Casey. I'm so excited to be here. I am going to share my screen with you. And while we get that set up, I want to let you know that I will be taking questions at the end. And if you have any questions that you are thinking about as I'm talking, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. So you can just go ahead and type it so you don't forget the question. And also, if I see the question and I feel like now is a good time to clarify or to answer it, I will, but I might be answering it later in the presentation. So feel free to put your questions there and we will go ahead and jump in. So thanks for that introduction. The only thing I would add here, I know that you hear me the word dementia quite a bit in my bio, and that is very much my specialty, and we will be talking about that today. But also, I have worked with hundreds of people with Parkinson's over the last 12-ish years being a speech language pathologist. And it runs in my husband's family. We have quite a few individuals in our family who also are living with Parkinson's. And so just to let you know that, yes, I specialize in dementia, but I have vast experience in the area of Parkinson's as well. And I'm so excited to kind of explore this topic a little bit. It might be one that feels intimidating or a little bit scary, and I hope that you don't feel like that at the end. So what we're going to talk about today is we want to define a few things. You know what Parkinson's disease is, but let's talk about the associated memory impairments that we see as individuals age. We'll talk about mild cognitive impairment. We'll talk about dementia. We'll also explore the common cognitive changes that happen with the diagnosis of Parkinson's. And then also at the end, we're going to talk about like, what do you do? What are some strategies to help manage and improve cognitive abilities? So, as you know, there are many different symptoms related to Parkinson's disease. And many of those symptoms are related to motor movement. And you're familiar with a lot of these, right? And we're not going to spend time talking about the motor symptoms of Parkinson's, but those include things like tremor, slowness of movement, limb stiffness, and gait and balance problems. So gait is how you walk, basically. But there are also non-motor symptoms that sometimes can impact your daily life just as much or more as motor symptoms. So things like depression and anxiety, apathy, hallucinations, even things like digestive problems that cause constipation, orthostatic hypotension, so a drop in blood pressure with movement, sleep disorders, loss of sense of smell, changes in speech production, and even voice quality. And then at the end of this list is cognitive impairment. And this is really where we're going to zoom in today and spend the majority of our time. What do we mean by cognitive impairments? So to answer that question, we first have to define the term cognitive, right? In medical terms, cognitive refers to mental processes. So that's our thinking abilities, how we learn, how we remember, how we process information and reason and use judgment. Anything essentially the complex thinking that our brain does for us. It encompasses a ton of brain functions that are necessary for us to just operate throughout the day in a normal fashion. So, for example, for you to log on to this webinar, there were many cognitive skills at work. Things like organization, right? You heard about this webinar at a period of time and you had to add it to your calendar and plan ahead. That's certainly a cognitive process. Throughout this presentation, you're going to have good attention to stay focused. And it might fluctuate a little bit, but attention is necessary. Memory, recall what time it started, and also be able to recall how to access the information like the link. And if you had any problems opening the link, you definitely flexed your problem solving skills. So having to figure out, well, if it didn't work this way, then what can I do next? So, when we talk about cognitive impairments or changes that happen with our thinking abilities that are associated with Parkinson's disease, I'm going to give you a list and we'll expand on these throughout this hour together. So, if I go over them quickly, don't worry, we will dive into some of them a little bit more. So the first is changes in attention. Now, a lot of these cognitive processes are really housed in the frontal lobe of our brain. And that's really the area right behind our forehead. That is where a lot of this complex thinking happens. And so when we have changes in our brain in that area, we will see these deficits come forward. So attention, difficulty focusing or concentrating on a task. As I describe some of these symptoms, you might say, oh, actually, I really relate to that. Like, I feel like maybe I do have a change of attention. If I think back 10 years ago and how I was able to really focus and bear down and pay attention to whatever task was in front of me versus how I perform today, I see a difference. And that's okay, right? These are normal cognitive impairments associated with Parkinson's disease. So attention. Next would be speed of mental processing. So a lot of people will describe a slowness in thinking. And it's not that you don't understand what other people are saying, but that it takes you longer to process it and then to respond. Problem solving. So if you encounter an issue, perhaps in the past, you really thought on your feet, you were able to shift gears really well, and you were a great problem solver. And maybe now you're noticing a difficult time being flexible. So if something happens, a problem occurs, maybe you feel a little more stuck now than perhaps you used to. And that problem solving also really helps us plan ahead, right? If you know that you have certain things to do today alongside of this webinar, you had to problem solve and figure out, what do I prioritize and where do I spend my time? Next is memory. A lot of times when we start talking about cognitive changes, people's brains immediately go to memory. And certainly when we bring up the word dementia, people think about memory. It definitely is one of the cognitive symptoms that we see. It's not the only one, but memory issues will make it difficult for someone to recall information. And if it's a short-term memory, that would mean difficulty recalling information from 5 minutes ago, from 2 hours ago, or maybe even from a week ago, things that happened recently. Or being able to retain information even for like 30 seconds, long enough to complete a task. So if you are adding someone's phone number to your contact list, you might be rehearsing it in your brain over and over again, 859-462-3757. And you're finding now that you can't hold on to information as long or as accurately. The next would be language changes. And when I say language, I don't just mean English, right? I mean language encompasses both expressing yourself in speaking, of course, but also in writing. But language also is understanding or comprehending. So that is comprehension of spoken words from other people, but also reading. So written words, phrases, and sentences. So we see language changes across all of those, what we call modalities. And so that could result in you feeling like you're having a difficult time thinking of the words you want to say, or if that tip of the tongue like oh, what's his name? That might be happening more often. Or you might find that whether you're reading complex information or you're having a complex conversation with lots of complicated vocabulary and different kinds of complex ideas, that you're finding that you're having a hard time comprehending that more so than you used to. Visual spatial changes also are considered a cognitive impairment. And this, even though it has the word visual, which is reference visual information, it's not eyesight change, okay? Certainly, as we get older, our eyesight changes. I'm 35, I've noticed that my contact prescription is changing over time, right? But this is visual spatial. So not only being able to see things, but understanding where they are located in correlation to yourself. So changes in depth perception, which means that you might overshoot or undershoot objects that you're reaching for. Or when you are walking down a hallway, you might find yourself bumping into furniture or bumping into walls and not being able to figure out where things are in relation to you anymore. Or you might see something and misperceive it. So you might look out the window and think that you see a dog when really it is a stump, a tree stump, right? So visual misperceptions. And then we also see in Parkinson's disease fluctuations. Now, you are probably familiar with fluctuations in your physical capacity, right? Some days you feel like you move really well, and then other days it's more of a struggle. And I wouldn't even just say days, right? You've experienced where maybe you have moments where you're moving really well and then moments where you struggle more. And the same happens cognitively. So we see fluctuations throughout the day and almost really inconsistently. You don't know to expect them sometimes, but you'll have sudden or frequent changes in your alertness, so how awake you are, in your attention, so how well you can focus, and in mood, right? So you might have mood fluctuations that are related not necessarily to your personality, but to your cognition and the way your brain is working. Now, this certainly is not an exhaustive list of cognitive impairments, but these are going to be the ones that you're going to notice most often and that we are going to be talking about today. So, when I say that individuals with Parkinson's disease will experience cognitive changes, I don't mean that all of those cognitive symptoms on a list are just going to boom, hit you one day. One day you are completely fine, and the next you wake up and you have problems with all of those. Certainly, that's not how it works. You know that from the physical changes that you might have experienced over time, that it can be slow and insidious, and you start to notice things over time. So the same is true for cognition. So if we have a timeline here, at the beginning, you might start to notice changes in yourself for attention or memory or complex reasoning. But they're often subtle and inconsistent. So you have some days where you feel like, oh my gosh, should I be concerned? And then other days where you're like, oh no, I must have just been stressed. So that might be on one side of the spectrum where the cognitive changes are just starting. And on the other end of the spectrum, cognitive changes are impacting every aspect of your life, including caring for yourself. So you can't even get dressed in the morning without those cognitive changes impacting your ability to function. And it also can impact your ability to communicate with others, right? If you can't remember things for more than 30 seconds, then conversations start to become really hard and it begins to impact your relationship with other people. So we have a spectrum here, and I want to put some terminology to this spectrum so that we can talk about it in a better way. So let's talk about this progression of cognitive changes. We're going to start on the one side of the spectrum with normal cognition. And so what I mean by normal cognition, this is going to be our baseline. And so this is when your cognition is perfectly fine, it's intact, and it's functional. So this is baseline. This is where you start. The next progression here is where what we call age-associated cognitive decline. So let's get into that a little bit more. Age-associated cognitive decline refers to a gradual change in those cognitive abilities that occur with normal aging. This is not something that we need to be concerned about, but it is something that we notice. So this can include things like being slightly slower in your processing, having more difficulty multitasking. So you might notice that you need to do one thing at a time. Also, more frequent communication issues that, oh, what was that thing called? The thing here, though, is that you eventually get there, right? You might need a little bit more time processing, but you can process and comprehend. You might need a little bit more time thinking of the word you want to say, but then you get there and you remember it, okay? So these changes are going to be subtle and they're going to be imperceivable by others. So other people don't notice. You might bring this up to other people and say, "Oh my gosh, what's going on with me?" And they say, "Oh, you're fine. I haven't noticed anything." And also, they're not going to affect your daily functioning. So your normal routine throughout the day is not these age associated, normal age related changes are not going to impact the way that you care for yourself and the way you go throughout your life. Okay. So the next step here is going to be what we call mild cognitive impairment. So let's dive into that. Mild cognitive impairment is going to be an increase, impairment, or a further decline from that last step, from the age-related cognitive decline. So mild cognitive impairment is a progression that's not considered normal. These changes that are happening in your cognition are now noticeable by other people. Okay, so the normal age associated things are only noticed by you, and now mild cognitive impairment, they're being noticed by other people. But it still is not affecting your daily functioning. So you're still able to go throughout your day as normal, perhaps even still work. It's just that you're noticing struggle and you are having to make some modifications in your life a little bit, but you're still able to compensate for it. Now, research tells us that individuals with mild cognitive impairment are kind of split into thirds. A third of people with MCI are going to stay that way for the rest of their life. Okay. They do not get worse, but they do not get better. A third of people with MCI, actually, their cognition gets better. And that's because the cognitive changes that were experiencing are caused by something treatable. So there are things that are like infections, vitamin deficiencies like B12, thyroid disorders, other metabolic issues. All of these things can cause cognitive symptoms, but if treated, those cognitive symptoms go away. So a third of people in general in the world who have MCI will be able to get it treated and they might get better. But then the last third of people will have further progression in their cognitive abilities. And so they will progress and those symptoms will get worse. Okay. So in this stage of mild cognitive impairment where other people are starting to notice, it's incredibly important that we go to the doctor, that we get blood work done, because it could be something that's easily treatable. And if so, great, right? Like that's awesome. But unfortunately, many people just think, oh, well, this is normal. I guess this is my life now. And they unnecessarily live with cognitive deficits. Okay, so now we're caught up here on the timeline. Normal cognition's where we start. Then we go to age-associated cognitive decline. And then sometimes people move into mild cognitive impairment. But if we were to progress and these cognitive symptoms get worse, then we start looking at the word dementia. So let's talk about that. Dementia is not a normal part of aging. Okay, so if we were to look back at this timeline and we were to draw a line right down the middle here, On the left side, normal cognition and age-associated cognitive decline are normal. That's okay. It's nothing that needs to be treated. And if you were to go to the doctor for cognitive concerns, they would do all kinds of testing and not be able to find anything, any evidence that there's something wrong. But then on the right side here, where we have mild cognitive impairment and certainly dementia, this is no longer normal and this is diagnosable and it can be picked up with testing. So dementia is not a normal part of aging. And I say that because in generations past, when individuals would have dementia, including my great grandfather, they called it hardening of the arteries. And it was just, well, that's just what happens. Like he's getting older. But that is not true. We know that for certain now that dementia is not a normal part of aging. So, what is dementia? According to the Alzheimer's Association, dementia is a general term for loss of memory, language, problem solving, and other thinking abilities that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. So, in the definition, regardless of where you find a definition of dementia, you will see two components. Number one, you will see a cognitive decline. So, when we say cognitive, right, we mean memory, language, problem solving, thinking abilities. And it's a loss of these abilities. And so other people are noticing, other people are seeing, and it's a very obvious cognitive decline. And then the second component of the definition of dementia is that it's severe enough to interfere with daily life. So the second component here is that it's affecting your daily functioning. So if we apply that to our timeline, we see a progression here, right? Normal cognition, no one's noticing, and it's not affecting your functioning. There is no cognitive changes. Age-associated cognitive decline, it's not noticed by others. It's not affecting daily functioning. Mild cognitive impairment, it is being noticed by other people, but it's still not affecting daily functioning. And when we get to dementia, it is noticed by others and it is affecting daily functioning. Okay, so that is all we know. When we say that someone has dementia, it just means they have cognitive deficits that are noticed by others and it's affecting their functioning. But there are many causes of dementia. Dementia is just kind of that umbrella term. There are many diagnoses that fall under the umbrella of dementia. The most common cause and the diagnosis that makes up 60 to 80% of all people with dementia is Alzheimer's disease. You've heard of this. Alzheimer's disease typically presents first, like the first symptoms that someone will notice is short-term memory loss. So they're going to be repeating stories, repeating questions, they're going to be misplacing items. So just their memory becomes very, very short. But there are other causes of dementia, including vascular dementia, which is associated with blood flow changes in different parts of the brain. A lot of people with vascular dementia have had a past history of strokes or mini strokes, also referred to as transient ischemic attacks, TIAs. Also, there's frontotemporal dementia, which is the most common type of dementia in individuals under the age of 65. The symptoms for frontotemporal dementia can either be behavioral, where someone is impulsive and they are socially, sexually inappropriate, perhaps. Or the other side of frontotemporal dementia, the symptoms are language-based. So the person has a difficulty with communicating, whether that's expressing themselves or understanding others. But the one that we're going to talk about today is called Lewy body dementia. And the reason we talk about this today is that Lewy body dementia is related to Parkinson's disease. So let's also acknowledge the fact that there are many other types of dementia. These are the four most common, but there are, I think, over 100 types, 100 diagnoses that cause dementia, cognitive symptoms other people notice that's affecting their daily functioning. That includes things like Korsakoff syndrome, Huntington's disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. There are many, many more. But today we're going to talk about Lewy body dementia. So Lewy body dementia is an umbrella term in and of itself, LBD. It is going to encompass two different diagnoses. The first is called Parkinson's dementia. Okay, so all right, you see the word Parkinson's, you know, okay, this must be related, right? Parkinson's dementia is when a person experiences motor symptoms first. So if we think back to one of the first slides I showed you where I had motor symptoms on one side and non-motor symptoms on the other, a person who has Parkinson's dementia means that they first had motor symptoms. So they had the tremors, they had the stiffness, they had the slow movement. And then sometime later down the road, they started showing signs of cognitive decline. So they started having difficulty with attention, memory, problem solving, all of those things on our cognitive slide. Okay. So if someone first has motor symptoms and then later they're demonstrating cognitive symptoms, then they will get a diagnosis of Parkinson's dementia. Parkinson's dementia. So Parkinson's dementia is considered a Lewy body dementia, okay? On the other side of things, we have something called dementia with Lewy bodies, okay? They weren't super creative, I think, when they came up with this term, but dementia with Lewy bodies means that a person had cognitive symptoms associated with dementia with Lewy bodies, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But the cognitive symptoms came first, and then later down the road, they might and will probably exhibit some motor symptoms. So, Lewy body dementia, the big umbrella term, is a type of dementia that is caused by the proteins called Lewy bodies. If you have done a lot of education in the world of Parkinson's, you're probably familiar with that term. And the way I like to describe this for people is essentially if there are Lewy bodies in the brain, they're probably wreaking havoc at a certain point. They are causing your life to become more complicated. But if those Lewy bodies are in a part of the brain and in a part of the basal ganglia where it's affecting someone's physical abilities, their motor abilities first, they'll be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. But if those Lewy bodies in the brain first start showing cognitive symptoms, then the person will be diagnosed with dementia with Lewy bodies. Now, the person with motor symptoms first and the person with cognitive symptoms first are going to be at risk down the road as we see progression of the other symptoms. So the people with Parkinson's are going to be at risk, a higher risk of having those cognitive symptoms develop as their condition progresses. And the people with dementia with Lewy bodies are going to be at risk, a higher risk than the normal population of having those physical symptoms normally associated with Parkinson's disease. People with dementia with Lewy bodies who later experience motor symptoms might have a diagnosis of Parkinsonism, perhaps. That gets a little bit more complicated, but essentially, if we were to zoom out, this is the general way that these terms are associated. So for the two people, a person who has Parkinson's dementia and a person with dementia with Lewy bodies, on the outside and to the general public will look very similar in their presentation as far as their cognitive symptoms. So let's talk in general about the overall Lewy body dementia and how that presents cognitively. I know these are kind of complicated concepts, and so a good question from Rob says, how does one tell the difference? So when we're talking about the different types of dementia in general, like we have Alzheimer's, we have vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, they're all caused by different things. So with Alzheimer's disease, we have amyloid plaques and tangles that cause cognitive symptoms. In Lewy bodies, we have Lewy body proteins. In frontotemporal dementia, it's more tau proteins. Vascular dementia, it's blood flow changes. So that requires seeing a doctor, usually a neurologist, to determine what is the cause of the cognitive symptoms. Because on the outside, sometimes people look pretty similar. But when you start looking at brain imaging, you start looking at things like that, it can be very specific as to the different types. And then if we look at how can we tell the difference between age-associated memory impairment and the things that are more problematic, like mild cognitive impairment and dementia, the big thing there is that other people are noticing. Okay, so that's the big difference. Normal age-associated is that you might notice it in yourself, but other people don't notice. But for mild cognitive impairment, other people are starting to notice, which just means it's getting more severe and you can't hide it or you can't compensate for it as much. So the symptoms, the cognitive symptoms that we see in Lewy body dementias will include the cognitive changes that we talked about earlier, right? So all of those things are still true: attention, memory, problem solving, all of that can be lumped in the cognitive changes. But there's also a few things that are very specific to Lewy body dementia symptoms. And the next is visual hallucinations. So this is when you see things in your environment that look just as real as everything else, but it's not actually real. It's not there. And so for people with Lewy body dementia, they will often see people, animals, small children, bugs, and shadows. And so though that can be extremely disrupting, it's almost as if I've heard it described as though, if you think about the things that you dream, some kind of like weird, crazy things, it's imagine like dreaming those things while you're awake. So you're operating in your normal life, and all of a sudden there is a snake on the floor or there's bugs on the walls. That can be really disrupting and really disorienting for the person experiencing it. And for those who are around, it can be really confusing because all of a sudden they're reacting to something that you don't see and you didn't see coming. And then third is an REM sleep behavior disorder. And so this is textbook Lewy body dementia. We have cognitive changes that fluctuate, visual hallucinations, and an REM sleep behavior disorder. So this means that when someone is sleeping, especially when they get into REM sleep, their bodies do not produce a hormone that essentially paralyzes your body, which is supposed to happen so that you don't act out your dreams. For someone with an REM sleep behavior disorder, they physically act out their dreams while they're asleep. And so they might be described as fitful sleepers. They might be someone who falls out of bed frequently, and you're going to be waking up all the time. Because if you're flailing your arms and legs around, you're falling on the ground, you're punching the person that you're sleeping next to, that's super disruptive for your sleep. And so when you sleep, you're not getting lots of good quality restorative sleep. And so this not only affects the sleep experience at night, but it can then go throughout the rest of the day, being really tired, really fatigued, falling asleep often. Other symptoms include depression and apathy, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So not only can depression exist in a person before and during someone also having Parkinson's, but the cognitive symptoms associated with Lewy body dementia can really like exacerbate or cause depression in a person who wouldn't otherwise have it. And so that looks like a loss of motivation and different fluctuations of moods. We also can see, of course, the motor symptoms that will eventually kind of present themselves, and then also those other non-motor symptoms in that first list. So blood pressure changes, heart rate, sweating, digestion, constipation, things like that. Okay, so Lewy body symptoms, these are really what we see, what we're looking for when we're looking at a diagnosis, perhaps. And so let's talk about what do we do about this? This kind of like so far, this feels like a big bummer, right? Like no one wants to live with these cognitive changes. But in the last half of our presentation, I want to make sure that you know that you're not powerless. Even if cognitive changes occur, there are proven ways that we can adapt, that we can be supported and we can support others, and really we can thrive. Because cognitive symptoms, much like physical symptoms, don't just come on all of a sudden, especially for individuals living with Parkinson's disease. They're slow. They come on like kind of without noticing sometimes. And so it's important that we understand what could be coming, but that we also are proactive. Certainly, we cannot fully prevent cognitive changes, nor can we cure them when they show up, but we can adapt, support, and thrive. I am a firm believer that expectations are the root of all frustration, um, because if we have improper expectations in anything in life, it will shape our experience. So if I had the expectation that every single day I came home from teaching at the university and my husband has the house completely spotless and clean and has a 5-course meal and has just like drawn a bath, like done all of those things. If I expect that every single day and I come home and that's not happening, I'm going to be disappointed and I'll certainly be frustrated. So I need to understand that that expectation is not appropriate for my husband every day. He also has a job. He's limited by time and resources and abilities at times. And so when we think about living with Parkinson's, you have now probably come to expect changes in physical abilities. But if you had no idea that cognitive symptoms could be a part of this experience, and all of a sudden they are, and you didn't expect it, you're going to be frustrated. And certainly you also might be scared. And so I want this kind of conversation here to set you up to know that here's the things that could be coming, that you could experience, but also here are some things you can do in the meantime and during, and we can make the most out of what you're able to do cognitively. Knowing what might happen can reduce fear, and also you need to have some early conversations because when cognitive symptoms occur, it's not just going to affect your life, it will certainly affect the people around you. And so you want to have early conversations about here's what I want to happen down the road potentially. It can help your support team be ready and prepared. So we're going to hope for the best, but prepare for what's possible. So, my first advice is to strengthen your thinking. There's something called cognitive reserve, which is basically our cognitive tank. And the more education we have, the more life experience we have, the more cognitively stimulating things that our brain has been doing over our life, it's filling our tank. And when we start experiencing a neurological condition that sometimes drains that tank some, the more we have to begin with, the better we're going to function over time. So we want to build our cognitive reserve. We want to strengthen our brain. So we want to incorporate mental stimulation, cognitively stimulating things every single day. The thing that you might think about first are things like puzzles and games and reading, and certainly that is great. But if you do a crossword puzzle every single day for 40 years, that would be essentially like doing a bicep curl every single day for 40 years, right? What are your biceps going to look like over that time? They're going to be pretty impressive. But if you do nothing else for the rest of your body, then you're going to have really big biceps on a weak body. And the same is true cognitively. If you only flex the crossword puzzle muscle of your body, of your brain, then that area, when you are given a crossword puzzle, it will be strong and you will be ready. But your other cognitive processes will suffer and they will weaken. So, certainly do puzzles and games and reading, but we need to get other muscles of our brain exercise. And the best thing you can do, honestly, is socialization. Be around other people, talking and conversate in conversations and activities. Go bowling, right? Like just do fun things with other people. That flexes so many cognitive muscles. And also try something new. So even if you have a life that is pretty routine, try to incorporate new things, like take a different route home. Try to walk a different direction when you go on a walk. So just incorporating new things. So a lot of things we hear about are learn a new language, learn a new instrument. All of those things can be really helpful. Routines are certainly important. Like it can be helpful to have a routine of exercising and eating well and doing your crossword puzzle every morning. But if we get too stuck in routines, it can cause cognitive weakness. All right. Also, apathy is common in Parkinson's and Lewy body dementias and any kind of cognitive impairments we're talking about in this area. But I want you to realize that apathy is not the same as laziness. Apathy is essentially, I don't care and I can't help it. Apathy and low motivation are brain based. Our brain is responsible for making us motivated. It's not always a choice when someone is living with Parkinson's disease and they are starting to demonstrate apathy. It's not that they're just it's a part of their personality. It is a part of the cognitive decline. And so other people need to instill motivation in them to compensate for the I don't want to attitude. And the way that we can do that is by approaching someone with apathy and saying, hey, I need your help with this, right? That motivates someone. Or we can use visual timers, we can use checklists, we can show them that by participating in cognitively stimulating activities and things like that are helpful. And we also need to make it make sense. So if we're telling them, hey, you need to do this crossword puzzle because I watched a webinar and it sounds like a good idea, that's not very motivating, right? We need to make them understand why it's important. So, hey, you know what? I'm going to try this new recipe. Can you help me look through this you know, the grocery store ad and find what the best deals are? Should we be going to Meijer versus Kroger versus, whatever grocery stores in your area? And celebrate and acknowledge small wins. It can be frustrating living with someone with apathy and feeling apathy yourself, so give yourself credit. We also can make life easier by reducing cognitively distracting things. So, reducing background noise and clutter. We can always get someone's attention before we're asking them to do something or telling them something. We also want to make sure we speak clearly and with pauses between our words with one idea at a time. So, we're not going to talk to people like they're a baby. Can you help me with something? That's not at all what I'm saying. I say we want to speak clearly, with pauses, and with intention. That helps them process better. We can also offer choices. So if we're just saying, hey, what do you want to eat? It might be difficult to process all the options. And so instead, we can say, would you like meatloaf or spaghetti? Right? So make life easier, especially in moments when things are difficult. And some tasks that take a lot of cognitive power, we can make it easier by making lists, checklists, writing notes, and referring to them. We certainly know that there are rhythms with Parkinson's, especially when it comes to medication timing and things like that. So find rhythms and plan challenging tasks accordingly. So maybe every time you have an appointment, instead of setting it at 3 o'clock, which is not a good medication time, it's kind of a downtime for you, make sure it's always at 9 a.m. in the morning. And don't underestimate the basics. I know sleep can be disturbed, but really prioritize sleep as much as you can. Eat balanced meals and move. Physical activity is really crucial to cognitive abilities as well. Small changes can make a big impact. And really, staying connected is important, not just because it makes us feel good, but it's that cognitive stimulation. So, joining support groups, counseling, talking through, you know what, I'm hearing that these cognitive changes might happen. Let's process what that makes me feel. And making sure that friends and family are part of these conversations and part of learning about what to be expected down the road. It's always incredibly important that you have regular checkups with your medical providers because there are some medications that are helpful for Parkinson's symptoms that also are helpful for cognitive symptoms. It can improve your function. But there's also medications that are dangerous for individuals with any kind of Lewy body dementia. Things like Haldol can cause really intense cognitive decline for short periods of time, and sometimes those can be permanent. So it can be helpful to ask for a cognitive assessment, regardless of where you feel like you are, whether you're normal cognition or you're all the way in the dementia space. Having regular cognitive testing can track your progress over time. And don't assume that cognitive changes that you're experiencing is just dementia and oh well, there's nothing I can do about it. Because, like I said before, there are some cognitive changes that are related to vitamin deficiencies, infections. So don't write things off as, oh, this is just another part of my Parkinson's. If you're having a fever, that's not Parkinson's. There are other medical things that could be going on that could be negatively impacting your cognition. And I do want to say, we call depression pseudo dementia in the world of dementia because depression alone can cause memory changes. It can cause apathy. It can cause difficulty with flexible thinking and problem solving. And so, if you feel like depression might be a component, certainly seek medical professionals to support you through that. And I couldn't finish this presentation without talking about rehabilitation therapy. I am a speech language pathologist, so I provide speech therapy, and we can provide support for any kind of cognitive or communication changes that you experience. We can also help you strengthen voice-related changes. It's very common for individuals with Parkinson's to have a softer voice and for it to be harder for other people to understand you. And we're experts in that. We also help with swallowing function. So if you're noticing any changes with your swallowing, please seek us out. Occupational therapy is also really important. They really help with daily self-care. So if those cognitive changes are impacting your ability to care for yourself and your daily functioning, occupational therapists can help support you and find some tips and tricks and strategies and to keep you safe. And physical therapy is excellent in enhancing and preserving movement as much as possible, and also prioritizing not only your safety, but the people around you who might be helping you get up, right? Your caregivers, perhaps, and helping them know how to support you best. Most of the time, these services, if we can determine and document that they're medically necessary, are fully covered, especially by traditional Medicare, but also by other private health insurance too. All right, so I hope that this helps you kind of better understand the road ahead. But there is one thing I want to tell you. According to recent research, around 70% of people living with Parkinson's disease will develop dementia at some point over the progression. I know that feels like that's a lot, and it can feel alarming, but we need to understand that although, yes, we can allow time to feel scared about that, I also want to challenge you for that to make you to get prepared because everybody's path is different. Not all people will experience Parkinson's, like cognitive decline, the exact same way, certainly not with the same timing. And early conversations with loved ones and other providers will make sure that you have a plan going forward. And staying proactive will try to preserve those cognitive abilities for as long as possible so that you can maintain a quality of life wherever you are in your progression. Okay, so I see we have some, here, let me go to my next slide. I have opportunity for some questions here. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can put them in the chat or you can turn your microphone on if you'd like to talk to me. But thank you for being here. I look forward to talking about this more if you have questions.
Very well done, Adria. I'd like to read one comment. Let's see. This was an excellent webinar, one of the best I've attended. The content was thoughtful and well organized, and the presentation was superb. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'm glad it was helpful.
I really thought it was profound to hear about building your cognitive reserve. I really thought
Yeah.
that was compelling. Great things, let's see. Oh, great things that I need to think about. Thank you. And there is a question. What are the dangerous drugs for
Sure.
cognition?
So I'm sorry, I can't list all of them for you, but there are in the antipsychotic realm typically. One of them, like I mentioned in the presentation, that is black box for people with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia, which means that it is like a do not prescribe, do not take under any circumstance, is Haldol, which is a sedative. So I encourage you to, I mean, you can Google medications not for Parkinson's or medications contraindicated for Parkinson's, and you will find a list. And I know some individuals with Parkinson's might even list those as allergies so that they make sure even if they're not able to advocate for themselves, let's say you had a terrible car accident, you're unconscious, that doctors will see in your medical chart for sure not to prescribe them. So that's something to think about. But they do have negative impacts not only on your physical functioning, but on your cognition. And some research has shown, especially with Haldol specifically, that some of those cognitive changes it causes could be permanent. So that's incredibly important to know those.
Thank you for sharing that. And I like the idea of adding those as medications that you're allergic to.
Mhm.
Here is another question. Can medical imaging distinguish each of the four main types of dementia you mentioned?
So the simple answer to that is yes, but in the very mild stages, like when someone is first starting to show cognitive changes, if we were to simply do brain imaging, it might not be super obvious. It's not like the brain looks super obviously different in those four types of dementia. But the reason I say yes is that, let's say, 10 years into the progression of people with four different types of dementia, we do see some changes that are pretty obvious across them. But typically, when this brain imaging is happening, it's in the early stages. And so we cannot rely on brain imaging alone. We have to also look for blood work. Sometimes it includes things like cerebral spinal fluid, like a spinal tap, looking at components in there, but also just looking at symptoms. And so there are very specific set of symptoms that are separate from all four of those. But in the very beginning stages, it's very hard to tell because we don't have a lot of symptoms to go off of, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Any last questions before we conclude? Well,
If
thank you.
not, I'll
Yes,
put
go
up this
ahead.
slide here. So if you want to reach out, you want to talk more about this, my email address is info@belikecare.com. I have a website, it's belikecare.com. And then also, if you want to learn more about dementia, or you have someone with dementia in your life, perhaps, I have over 500 videos that are 90 seconds or less about a lot of these concepts surrounding cognition and cognitive decline. And so if you are on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, you could type in Be Light Care and you'll find all of those videos for free.
Glad that you included that. And I think, Adria, you had mentioned that you'll share your presentation as well. So that will be in a
Yeah.
follow-up email.
Yes, I
Thank
will.
you very much. It was very knowledgeable, especially from such an esteemed dementia presenter, educator. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank
Bye
you
for
so much.
now.